in terms of the materials, I'm working on this glass gray palette by New Wave, and glass palettes are really nice because you can mix on them, you know, paint with them and then scrape it off at the end with like a razor blade. And then I really like the gray palettes or wood palettes too because it actually helps with mixing. It's like more similar to the color of your painting, so it's easier to mix the tones on a gray or wood palette than it is a white palette. And as far as the colors that I'll be using, I'm using a slightly more limited palette than I usually use. I've just like removed the yellows and the greens from the palette to just simplify for the flesh tones that we'll be using. So basically we've got some pre-mixed colors over here, which I'll show you and talk about more in a sec. And then I've just got the pure oil pigments. And so I've got titanium white, cadmium orange, this is actually naphthol red, this is alizarin permanent, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. This is actually a Prussian blue. You can kind of see if I mix. It looks black at first, but if you mix a bit of white in, you can see. And it's a really rich, saturated blue. It's really beautiful. I've just recently added that to my palette. Then we've got Mars Black. And so in terms of the pre-mixed colors, we'll do this one first. This is what I refer to as my base shadow mixture. So this is, you can see, proportionally more cadmium orange and just a little bit of ultramarine blue. That's this one, not the Prussian blue. And I'll just mix it up. We'll see if the proportions are right. But basically it mixes to a greenish brown. And then I've recently added pink to my palette. So I'm using some of the naphthol red, which is, it mixes to a really nice pinkish color. Pink out of the tube is shockingly expensive, so you can just mix it up this way. I find it really useful to have this color on my palette. And I'm just using a palette knife to kind of mix up the colors. I'm wiping my palette knife in between with a blue shop towel. The next color is a mid-tone gray, so mid-tone's kind of like the color of my palette. I'm using a bunch of white and just a little bit of Mars Black. Just mix that up. It should be like a mid-tone, so I creep up on the amount of black because the black can be a really intense pigment, so you don't want to start with too much. And once you mix it up, you can tell whether you need to add more. Actually, that's about the color that I do like it to be. It's a little lighter than this palette, but that's about right. And then the next one is a blue mixture is what I call it. So it's a lot of white, a little bit less of the ultramarine. And then the next one will be kind of what I call like my base flesh color. And actually this color will work for all skin tones. It's just a base that will be tinting, you know, in various ways for various different shadow effects, etc. And basically it's made up with titanium white, so a lot of white, a little cadmium orange, and just a teeny tiny bit of this blue mixture. So I'll just mix that in. And again, kind of creep up on the amount of blue mixture. It can get really desaturated if you add too much. So you can always add more, but just start with like less than you think. And also make sure you use enough orange for this. I like to have this base, this so-called base flesh color, a little bit on the dark side because it's really easy to add white as you're working, but it's a little bit harder to deepen the color as you go. So this looks a little too saturated. I'll mix a teeny bit more of the blue mixture, and the blue mixture basically just desaturates the hotness of the orange. So that basically shows you the palette I'll be using, and I'll be working on this gesso board today by Ampersand. And this is an amazing surface. It's really smooth. It's also got a little bit of tooth, so it's not too slick. And today I'll be working on an 8x10 panel. In terms of the brushes I'm using, I'll be using a range of 2 to 12 sized bright brushes. So some of them are brights, which have this square tipped top. And the thing that I really love about that is that you can use the like wide part of the brush to get like a wide stroke, or you can use like the narrow part of the brush to get a very thin line, or you can use the corner of it to get like a little dot. So you can get like really detailed with this brush. And then I also have these Filberts, and I use them a lot for blending, as you'll see in the videos. They just, you know, there's a couple different sizes, a smaller one and a medium-sized one, and they're just really nice for blending. And then I also have this one, I just have one like very small round, which is good for like the most extreme sort of detail work. And then lastly, I also have these Princeton grainer brushes. These can be a little bit difficult to find. Sometimes art stores actually have them, so check the art store near you. They're called grainers because it's like wood grain. They have some long hairs and some short hairs, so they make like a lot of little lines like side by side, so they're really good for hair and eyelashes. I've got a 3/4 inch one. This is a 1/2 inch one, and sometimes I'll even have a 1/4 inch one for doing like, especially like eyelashes. In terms of the mediums I'll be using this M. Graham Walnut Alkyd medium. It's a similar consistency to linseed oil, so you could just use linseed oil if you want. This is just what I use in my practice. It's really wonderful. It's non-toxic. It does help it dry a little faster, which is especially important if I'm working on, you know, painting over a period of time. And it's just a really great medium. And then I also just love this Gamblin solvent-free gel. It's a bit more gel-like in consistency. It's really good for glazing. It also is non-toxic and helps make the paint dry a little faster as well. So get your materials together and let's get started.